Hi, everyone. Good evening. I just want to do a quick time check and say we're giving folks a couple more minutes to come. We've got at least 50 people on the Zoom. I will acknowledge it's game 5 of the World Series. The Dodgers are currently losing. It's okay. We're going to come home and take it all. That's the last partisan thing I will say tonight. Go Dodgers. But we want to give people a couple more minutes. If you haven't gotten something to eat or you want your second round, please do so. And thank you all for being here. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Denise Pacheco. I'm looking at, am I in the camera? I am in the camera. My name is Denise. I need to see it right here. My name is Denise Pacheco. I use she, ella, they pronouns. I am Senior Director for Alumni Diversity Programs and Initiatives. And our team is really excited tonight to partner with the Asian American Studies Center, our School of Education and Information Studies, our Asian Pacific alumni, and our Filipino alumni to bring this event to you tonight. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. OiYan Poon, Dr. Anthony Campo, for being here tonight. We're really excited to learn more from you. I wanted to begin by welcoming you all to the James West Alumni Center. If you've not been here before, this is your home away from home for alumni, current students, staff, faculty, and friends of UCLA. We want you to always know that you can come here. If at any time you want to get more food, please do so. We are also selling OiYan and Anthony's books here at the back, and at the end of the event, they will be available back there for signing. So thank you, ASUCLA staff, for being here as well and helping us order these books from the publishers. Restrooms, just to also orient you, if you go out this sliding door, which will slide, you can go out this door, head to your left, and there are restrooms right here if you need to do that as well. Tonight, we will also have some remarks from Dr. Karen Umemoto, our director of the Asian American Studies Center. So I will briefly introduce her as well. But we have a really exciting conversation for you. We've got 57 folks on the Zoom that might also be watching the Dodger game. That's okay. They're losing, so you should listen to us instead. So I want to also begin as we typically do at UCLA, and this for me as Chicana, this is an important sacred time where our ancestors come back to visit us, and so that makes it even more meaningful for me that we do begin our events with a land acknowledgement, and we pay our respects to the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva people. So we just want to invoke that tonight. And we pay our respects to the Honukviktam, the Ahihirom, and the Iyuhinkem, our ancestors, our elders, and our relatives, past, present, and emerging. So I always want to say I encourage you to learn more about the indigenous caretakers of the land upon which you live and work and find community. So as I mentioned, I want to begin tonight by also welcoming and introducing Dr. Karen Umemoto. She will be giving us some brief remarks and tell us a little bit about our featured author tonight, Dr. OiYan Poon. I have to also say, Dr. Poon and I went here to graduate school together in our School of Education, and I remember vividly many conversations and what an incredible leader, scholar, mentor, and supporter she has always been to us, to the community, to uplifting intersectional struggles for justice. And so it's such an honor to welcome you back to campus and to celebrate this really important book and just have you share your incredible wisdom and insight as a leader. And so really excited personally as well for you to be here tonight. So Dr. Karen Umemoto is a professor in our Department of Urban Planning and Asian American Studies. She is the inaugural Helen and Morgan Chu Endowed Director's Chair of the Asian American Studies Center. We really want to thank Helen and Morgan Chu for an incredible gift to further the work of ethnic studies at UCLA. So thank you, Chu family. Professor Umemoto received her Ph.D. in urban studies from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She holds a master's degree in Asian American Studies here from UCLA and a bachelor's degree in interdisciplinary social science from San Francisco State University. Shout out to FS State. If you want to study ethnic studies, that's another incredible place to be if you're not here. Professor Umemoto's research and practice takes a broad view of planning in the context of social inclusion, participatory democracy, and political transformation. She has published over 50 articles, book chapters, and professional reports, and she has served on the boards for the Association for Asian American Studies and the Association of Collegiate Schools of Planning. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Umemoto to join us and offer some brief remarks to kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. It's always an honor to co-sponsor events with the UCLA alumni. Not that I'm biased as a Bruin, but just saying. But today is also like a homecoming because both OiYan Poon, Dr. OiYan Poon and Dr. Anthony Ocampo both got their PhDs here at UCLA. So we're really looking forward to this evening. And OiYan, I want to just congratulate you on the publication of your new book, Asian American is Not a Color, Conversations on Race, Affirmative Action, and Family. I know that the weaving together of your scholarship, your memoir, and your personal reflections in tribute to your daughter, Tay, is really moving. And so we look forward to hearing more about your personal journey and the book tonight as well. OiYan Poon is a senior research fellow right now at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and co-director of the College Admissions Futures CoLab and a consultant to the Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker's, sorry, tongue twister, Office on Higher Education Policy. Dr. Poon's research has focused on racial politics of Asian Americans and educational access and admission systems and practices. She, in addition to authoring this wonderful book that is here in the back table, she really explores how Asian Americans are shaping the future of race relations through debates over educational policies like affirmative action. And I think we've seen how influential that debate has been. In another book, Rethinking College Admissions, Research-Based Practice and Policy, she and her colleagues examine and offer new ideas to transform the unequal structures and systemic norms of the college-going students in the United States. So please take a look at that too, Rethinking College Admissions. After earning her bachelor's degree at Boston College and her master's in education in college student affairs administration at University of Georgia, OiYan worked in multicultural student affairs as a first Asian Pacific American student affairs director at George Mason University and the first student affairs officer in Asian American studies at UC Davis. She then earned her PhD in race and ethnic studies in education with a graduate certificate in Asian American studies here at UCLA. She has been a professor at Loyola University, Chicago, Colorado State University, and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So please welcome Dr. OiYan Poon.
Oh, I can see myself. Good evening, everyone. And go Dodgers. Thank you so much for this really warm welcome. It is an amazing homecoming to be back here with friends and just dear loved ones and mentors and former classmates. And thank you, Denise, for going through the list of sponsors and hosts here, because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to remember everyone, but I just feel so honored to be here with you all tonight. And so, because I really feel like this is where I birthed my intellectual career and journey. And so really grateful to be here. So tonight I want to just start off by giving a quick overview of the book, Asian American is Not a Color. And then we're going to have a great conversation, myself and my dear friend Anthony Ocampo, who's also a Bruin. So just a brief overview of the book and what this is all about. And then a conversation. See if this clicker works. Oh. Nope. Uh-oh. Okay, sharing screen. And then is it this one right here? So next slide. There we go. Okay, oop, too far, too far. Now it's working. Okay. Okay, push hard. Thank you, Denise. So I have done research along two intersecting threads. A lot of my work has been, as Dr. Umamoto mentioned, around how admissions works. It's a black box, and I think there's a lot that can be said about how those systems operate and how we can make them more equitable. And then this other thread I've been always fascinated by, which is how and why do Asian Americans feel the way we do in very different ways about policies that are intended to expand opportunities and equity. And so doing this work, I think as a good academic, I did the peer review articles, I did the edited volumes, I did the research briefs, the policy briefs, all the things that you're supposed to do. And I never really anticipated or had a desire to publish a book for a more general audience. And then I became a mom in 2015. And in 2018, my daughter, Tay, pictured here when she was 3 in 2018. And just taking you back to 2018 for just a second, right? That's about a year and plus in change, 2 years into Trump administration. And I'm just gonna stop myself there. And you know, children were being torn away from their families at the southern border at the time. And that summer, Black Lives Matter, that movement was really growing and gaining steam. And Tay, when she was 3, asked me, "Mom, are we Black?" And I said, "No, we're not Black." And she goes, "Well, then are we white?" And I said, "No, we're not white." And she goes, "Well, then what are we?" And I said, "Oh, we're Asian American." And I think I was cooking dinner at the time in our kitchen. And I was like, "Good job, Mom. I answered the question, right? We can move right along." And then she goes, "But Mom, Asian American's not a color. I don't see that in my crayon box. I'm 3, I'm in preschool." This is, I think, a picture of her on her first day of preschool. And she was like, "That doesn't make sense to me." And my knee-jerk reaction as a very well-trained race scholar here at UCLA was, Michael Omi and Howard Winant, in their canonical work, Racial Formation, right? And it was like, I'm stopped myself from saying it out loud. And I was like, this is ridiculous. How is it that I have this whole career in studying race and ethnicity and systemic racism, and I don't honestly know how to talk to my own child about these issues? And of course, thankfully, we have at the Asian American Studies Center, you know, the multimedia is the word I was looking for, the multimedia textbook project, and really supporting Asian American studies learning in K-12, right? But back then, we didn't have things like this. And I had never really thought about, as someone who didn't really spend a lot of time with young children, I had no idea how to talk to my own daughter about these things. And so what I realized at the time in 2018, because I was also working on wrapping up some of these academic articles on a study I was doing, was she was really asking me, well, who are we? What are we? Who are we in relationship to other people in this world? And I realized that the research that I was doing at the time was really relevant to what she was asking about. And so let me tell you a little bit about that research. So you may remember about 10 years ago, the California State Legislature tried to overturn Proposition 209 and reinstate affirmative action in the state of California, and it was called SCA 5. So you have this picture here of presumably a mom signing a petition, holding a sign saying with a red X over SCA 5 and saying equal protection. And then these 2 young children holding a sign saying, "I study hard, do not reject me into UC because of my race," right? And so there was this outpouring of activity among a mostly Chinese diasporic community in California saying, we don't want affirmative action back. And this fear, you know, at the time there were stories where you know, Chinese American ethnic press was saying like, this is the new Chinese Exclusion Act, things like that, really equating these very different things as the same. And then the bottom picture is a picture of a mostly Chinese American community in Boston protesting against affirmative action in the SFFA versus Harvard lawsuit. And so in thinking about all these people, I remember in 2015 talking to Professor Peter Kiang at UMass Boston, And I was just lamenting essentially these folks who were protesting SCA 5 and protesting against affirmative action more generally. And I was just like, who are these people? They don't feel familiar to me. I identify as Chinese American too, but they just feel so distant from my own experiences in the communities I come from. They're ridiculous is essentially what I was saying, in not so many words, probably more profanities. And then Peter said to me, he was like, well, have you ever talked to them? I was like, why would I ever do that, Peter? That's wild. Like, what a bonkers thought. Like, why would I do that? And he was like, I don't know, maybe you'd learn something. And I was like, oh, right. And I was like, that's just silly, like whatever. And then I just kept thinking about it and kept thinking about it and decided, well, why don't I use the research skills that I learned here at UCLA and do this, right? So I decided to then interview people. So on so-called both sides of the debate, so to speak. So I interviewed 36 Asian Americans across the country, some here in Southern California, some in Northern California, in Chicagoland, which is where I live, and in the Northeast as well. And I learned a couple of really interesting things. I think that I really go through in the book. First, this is no surprise in 2024, misinformation, disinformation is very pervasive in all political and policy debates. And so when I asked these 36 people who were leaders and key members of organizations that claim to represent Asian American interests, first, how would you describe affirmative action and how it works in college admissions? The majority of them, so the blue part of the pie, the majority of them, I think it was 30 out of 36 of the people I talked to shared with me myths, basically falsehoods about what affirmative action was and how it worked in college admissions. They told me, oh, it's a racial quota or it's a point system. So if you checked off the right box, then you'll get extra points in the competition for admission seats. And so the people who were for affirmative action would say, and that's good because of the centuries of systemic racism. And then the folks who were opposed to the policies said, well, that's not fair because I can't do anything about how I identify, which shocked me because I was like, these are activists in this debate and they're telling me these falsehoods. And then the follow-up question I asked them was then, what's your ideal system for how admissions should work? And 33 out of the 36 described affirmative action in college admissions as it was operating in 2016. And so I was just really baffled that even the opponents were basically saying, well, you know, schools are unequal and that's due to racism and classism and so on and so forth. And so we need to understand and look for talent. And so we have to be fair and understand people's accomplishments within the context of the social conditions and their context of opportunity, essentially. It just shocked me, right? And I started wondering, well, maybe we could fix these conversations, right? If maybe there's more good information put out there. But then I realized maybe good information, factual information, as we have seen with the Supreme Court and in our politics today, how much does good evidence and research and science and data really, how far does it actually go these days? And I've been really sad, right? Especially when you have a Supreme Court that is downright rejecting actual fact and science and research in various cases, not just this one, right? So it's very frustrating. And because the other thing that I learned was, and it was a reflection of, I think something I learned here at UCLA and working as a GSR with Professor Paul Ong. Shout out, Paul, if you're out there. You know, he wrote about 20 some odd years ago this essay called The Affirmative Action Divide, the Asian American Affirmative Action Divide. And in talking to these 36 people, I realized there remains this deep divide, but it's also a historical legacy, a longstanding legacy and divide, not just in affirmative action, but in other issues as well. But in this case, in what I was studying, so on the left, you have a picture from 2022 in front of the Supreme Court. My daughter and I went there, and I feel like this picture really encapsulates the intergenerational nature, the cross-ethnic, the ethnic diversity, the racial diversity, the coalition and solidarity that was built between the Asian Americans who feel powerfully in support of affirmative action. And then on the right side, you have a predominantly Chinese American, Chinese diasporic community who were very much against affirmative action. And so the picture I have on the right, on the bottom, is from Brooklyn, New York in 2019. And the man is holding a sign saying equity, a code word for anti-Asian. And it really, I think to me, and when I found out who these two men are, the one in the red jacket and the one holding the sign, they're political dissidents from mainland China. One of them was a LGBTQ rights activist in mainland China, and the other one was a Tiananmen Square democracy activist. So not people that you would anticipate or assume would be against policies like affirmative action, right? So when I dug deeper, right, it's really for the folks on the right, the opponents of affirmative action, there was a deep sense of, well, these policies don't recognize, they dismiss anti-Asian racism. And so I can't be for it, right? And so there was this feeling of being dismissed and disrespected that was part of a lot of the conversations that we had. But in a lot of ways, what I kind of messily categorize it is on the left, you have justice, solidarity, and abundance ideologies. And on the right, you have just us, individualism and scarcity. This fear-laden kind of sense of scarcity and needing to just uplift just ourselves individually through an unjust system. Whereas on the left, justice, solidarity, and abundance is about changing systems so that everyone can benefit and we can all have nice things. And so as I thought about the histories that I learned here at UCLA in Asian American Studies, we have ancestors, right, who also followed these two different paths, right? You have, and I write about this in one of the early chapters about litigious Asian ancestors. On the left, you have examples historically like Wong Kim Ark, Lau versus Nichols, litigants in Lau versus Nichols, the originators of the Asian American movement and Asian American studies. And on the right, you also have litigious Asian ancestors as well. For example, in the Ozawa case, the Thin case, Lum v. Rice, right? The first two being immigration cases, and Lum, you know, the first two cases in immigration, they were both arguing that they should be considered as white in order to become US natural citizens. And Lum v. Rice, they were fighting in Mississippi, not necessarily against segregated schooling, but to be accepted into white schools, right? I don't want to go to the schools for Black people, for quote unquote colored students. We want to go and be categorized as white and go to the white schools. On the left, you know, these ancestors, Wong Kim Ark is why we have birthright US citizenship. Lau v. Nichols is why we have bilingual education rights, right? And of course, the Asian American movement with Asian American studies, right? So this Asian American divide has been here all along. And so I've been really thinking about what that means. And I think that's really at the heart of this book has been my ponderings with my third generation, multi-ethnic, you know, Chinese and Thai American daughter who's trying to figure out what does it mean to be me in this world? And how do I support her in doing this? And understanding that we're also living in this politic of fear, division, and how do we overcome that, especially when I don't know how far research and evidence go these days without strong storytelling. And so I'm going to end now by reading. I'm going to call up Anthony first, and then I want to read a section of the book just to give you a sample of how the book feels. Every chapter goes through a lot of the research, but they're book-ended. Every chapter starts and ends with love letters, essentially, to my daughter, to Tay. And so first I'm going to introduce Dr. Ocampo and have you come up, and then I'll read a section. Dr. Anthony Ocampo is a professor of sociology at Cal Poly Pomona. He is the author of Brown and Gay in LA, The Lives of Immigrant Sons and the Latinos of Asia, How Filipino Americans Break the Rules of Race, which has been featured on NPR, NBC News, Literary Hub, and in the LA Times. Raised in Northeast Los Angeles, he earned his BA in Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity and MA in Modern Thought and Literature from Stanford University, and his MA and PhD in Sociology from UCLA. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Ocampo. Be my friend up here.
Hey, everyone.
Yeah.
There we go. Hey, everyone in person. Hey, everyone on. Where's the camera?
Is it right there?
The internet. Hello, everyone.
Go Dodgers. What's the score? 5-5. Oh my gosh. Okay. You're making it happen. Okay, we're making this happen. All right, keep talking. All right.
Okay.
All right. So I want to read a section because tomorrow's Halloween. I'm going to read the story about Elsa. And yeah, so to really illustrate this concern of when feelings are involved, how far does evidence and research go or fact go? Not so sure it goes very far. So it's in the second chapter about how there was this shared misinformation about how affirmative action worked among the 36 people. So I'm going to read part of the first letter and the closing letter. Dear Tete, when I was pregnant with you, your father and I decided not to find out your sex. We didn't want to get swept up into pink or blue socialization. People would look at us funny when we told them we didn't want to know our baby's sex. One time, a stranger in a laundromat, after some casual talk, scolded me for not finding out your sex. If you don't know if you're having a girl or a boy, how will people know what kinds of gifts to buy the baby? That just seems rude to your family and friends who want to support you. When you were born, we dressed you mostly in primary colors and made sure you had a full range of toys and books, not just clothing, toys, and books, quote unquote, meant for girls or boys. We hid Disney princess toys and books, or regifted or donated them. Sorry, friends and family. Because I really didn't want Cinderella to eat my daughter, as Peggy Orenstein explained in her book. We were helpless in the wave of pink glitter crashing in on our home through gender socialization. As soon as you could express yourself, around when you were 18 months old, we gave you options in clothing. Without fail, you gravitated toward pink, lavender, sparkles, and lace. We didn't often watch TV or movies with you at home, but when you were 3 years old, you came home from preschool singing and imitating the dance moves from that earworm, Let It Go, from Disney's smash hit Frozen. That movie was first released in 2013, a few years before you were born, but as any parent of young children will tell you, right, Angela? Elsa is very powerful. When you were 4 years old, sometime before Halloween that year, you excitedly told me you were going to dress up like Elsa for Halloween. When I dropped you off in preschool that day, you walked into your classroom and announced to your best friend, Taylor, and the whole class, "Hey, everyone, I'm going to be Elsa for Halloween." I smiled at the cuteness as I got back in the car to drive to work. When I came back to pick you up from school, you ran over into my arms, wanting to cuddle. You looked very sad. Your teacher, Miss T, told me that you and Taylor had a screaming fight about who could be Elsa. You both argued that there could be only one Elsa for Halloween. I turned to you and said, "Oh, baby girl, anyone can dress up like anyone they want to be for Halloween." Your face crumpled and your eyes immediately welled up with tears as you quietly but sternly stated, "No, I want to be Elsa. Taylor cannot be Elsa." I hugged you closer and decided it wasn't worth arguing with you, that your scarcity mindset on Halloween was silly. I decided to just love you and comfort you in that moment. Over time, you let go of the idea of scarcity over Halloween dress up. People can hold their beliefs very tightly, even when they are very wrong. Providing new evidence and logic may not be enough to shift perceptions, especially when there are deep emotions fueling them. This is something I've observed, experienced, and learned many times in my life. I think I'll just stop there.
Thank you. When I first heard that story, I thought that was going in a totally different direction. I was like, is Taylor the white girl that's like, "I'm Elsa," because you're clearly not white, Tate.
Taylor actually identifies as mixed race Vietnamese.
Okay. But now I know it's a clear metaphor for the issues that are being discussed in the book.
Feelings are deep.
Feelings. There's a whole thing with Eduardo Bonilla Silva, a sociologist, talks about feelings and race and how we have to center that beyond just like the structural stuff as well. But I want to start by giving my own introduction to OiYan, if it's okay. She and I are both alums of UCLA. We came here. We had parallel journeys. We were here around the same era of the aughts, all the way to 2011. Went through the Great Recession. We were just commiserating about how that moment really shaped our academic journeys and such. But I'm lucky because after UCLA, even though we were thousands of miles apart, we have found our way back together in a writing group that OiYan started along with historian Ellen Wu and political scientist Janelle Wong.
All UCLA Bruins.
And we call it, what do we have a name for it? Bronco Book Club.
Bronco Bruin Book Club.
Oh, shoot.
Bronco. Okay. Also, the alternative name is Three Chinese Ladies and Anthony.
Yeah. But I feel super lucky because I get to be in this virtual room every month with this super, super smart people. And so I got to see this book evolve from there were some growing pains about how we had to almost unlearn the writing style that we were trained to develop at UCLA in order to become more story driven, more narrative driven. And I'm wondering about that unlearning process for you and how, like, what was that experience like of unlearning how to do that kind of academic writing?
I mean, you and I talk about this a lot, and I'm so grateful for having you in our group because we talk about this so much, about that unlearning, and you all saw me through a lot of iterations of various drafts. So just want to start by thanking you for that. But that unlearning hurt. It was very difficult because I think, and we've talked about this too, is academic writing, there's a formula to it. And once you learn that formula, it's pretty easy, right? There's 5 sections, you just bust it through, and then you make sure the through line's good through the 5 sections, and we're good, right? But then it ends up in a paywall and people can't read it, or, you end up being like me, trying to tell a 3-year-old about racial formation, right? And so I think it was just, it was almost like trying to reconnect to my humanity. And so I think you all encouraged me to do this, which is like start reading YA novels, fictional novels. I've been very into romance novels right now. I just finished The Kissing Quotient by Helen Huang. Very good, very fun. But yeah, I mean, just like reading different models and like, how do we storytell? And then just listening to a lot of podcasts. I have a lot of poet friends and storytelling friends, and just kind of like, how can we learn some of those skills and apply it to what we've learned? I don't know. How about you?
No, there were a lot of growing pains, I think, because a lot of the folks that I felt like I had to prove myself to at UCLA were pretty open about their confusion about why I wanted to write in a particular way. I remember when I was writing my first book, one of the professors I love most, who I will not name in this room because I love him that much, or her or them, I won't say, read a draft of the book, and the first comment to me was, I was like, what did you think?
Never Latinos of Asia?
Yeah, for the Latinos of Asia. And this person said, I think it was too personal. And this was before the book was published. I had maybe like 8 more months before it was going to come out. So I thought like, oh my God, I just destroyed my career. But in part, I think when you work at a Cal State, when you have students that are working 40 hours a week and parenting or caregiving, and they have like this much time to do the reading, it made me realize that you got to think about your storytelling as you're competing with a lot of other obligations, and I have no false pretense that like I'm entitled to their attention. I think that was what really kind of clicked for me. But yeah, I mean, in your book, I see a lot of influence from folks like Imani Perry. She wrote a book called Breathe, which is a letter to her two
Definitely
sons.
read that in writing it, and
Ta-Nehisi
also Ta-Nehisi
Coates,
Coates,
Between the
yeah.
World and Me,
Mhm.
Heavy by Kiese Layman.
Yeah.
And
Maya Angelou has a letter to her daughter's book. I read that. And also Dear Girls by Ali Wong was also an influence.
yeah, but I think what's wonderful about this list of writer role models is a lot of them are black women. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the influence of Black studies, black feminist thought in the work that you have put together here.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about the way Asian Americans and our very messy politics can get in the way of racial equity, right? And that's what we saw with this Harvard lawsuit, right? Even though there were no Asian American plaintiffs, the imagery and stereotypes of Asian Americans contrasted with the imagery and racial stereotypes of Black people, especially, is what opened up a dialogue space, essentially, a rhetorical space to allow for open up this possibility of essentially anti-Blackness. And I think that we're seeing that in some of the admissions results this season, the enrollment results, I should say, of this fall. We're definitely seeing some serious drops in that community. And I asked a group last night that I talked to, these young people, I was like, do we want to be the face of that erasure, right, of another community of color? And I think that's something we really need to think about and contend with, unfortunately.
You know, I think with Asian Americans, there are, for those of us that study Asian American communities or embedded in Asian American advocacy work, we have a sensibility about who Asian Americans are, but sometimes I forget that there's a whole world out there that for whom Asian American is essentially a blank category. And so I appreciate that your book has really addressed that we're kind of in a battleground moment to define what it means to be Asian American. We know as scholars that it's been something that was politicized in its origin, but what have you found has been the difficult thing about when you think about your Asian American audiences, like trying to get them on board with political issues, whether it be affirmative action or Black Lives Matter? Like, what did you encounter in terms of their sensibilities with racial issues from other communities of color?
You mean the people I talked to, or like the people who are reading it now and
Both,
reacting?
actually, both.
I mean, the people I talked to, right? I mean, the pro affirmative action people were obviously, they were very influenced. Most of them, and I talk about this, a lot of them had taken ethnic studies in college or, had opportunities in youth organizations growing up to explore their identity and explore, in a very Freudian sense, very education, right? Like, how do you read the world? How do you critically understand the world so you can lead to change it, right? But then the policy opponents, most of them were more recent immigrants. They were middle class, professional class immigrants for the most part. H-1B visas allowed them to come here. They lived a different experience and a very segregated lives here in the United States. And so they weren't exposed to the ideas. Essentially, they were not benefiting from, what you can learn in a diverse environment. And so they felt isolated and alone. So I've actually had one person in the opposition side reach out to me in the last year, and they were like, I didn't think of this way. And so I see a little bit of hope there. I think people who are reading it now, mostly it's been, friendly audiences. So people are like, I get this, but people are resonating with like, I know when I've been there, right? And I say oftentimes, I think in the book I even say this is like when I was growing up, I definitely identified more with the scarcity mindset, just us Asian Americans of assimilationist, right? Like I need to survive. And so surviving means just assimilating into the mainstream. I don't have time to think about changing the system, right? And I grew up in a very racially isolated experience, working class, but grew up in a working class white community. So had a really different experience than I think a lot of people growing up in a place like LA would.
And that was one of my questions I wanted to ask you is when you talked about the origin story of the book, with that conversation with Tay, which is so it was a moment. And I'm sure you had that version of your moment. And I'm wondering what's the origin story of your own.
Oh, we're getting deep now.
Yeah, like you're someone that dedicates your life to working on Asian American issues, Asian American communities, with research, you're teaching, you're speaking, and I'm wondering how that evolution occurred when you were someone that grew up, as you said, with the scarcity mentality, more like assimilationist mindset. What were the moments those watershed moments, or who were those people that you met that made you think a little differently about Asian American identity?
I often think about probably the most momentous moment, this watershed, as you put it, moment was, so I was an undergrad at Boston College, and at the time in the 90s, it was 80% white. And for me, that was like the most diverse environment I'd ever been in, right? And I was just like, this is amazing, right? But then I encounter, Asian Americans from all around the world in the country, and they're just like, this is so white. And I'm just like, I'm so confused, right? What is it? And so when I started at BC as an undergrad, I was the part of the first class that had to take a diversity requirement, right? And there were 2 Asian American studies classes at Boston College in the 90s. And my third year, you're trying to manage your course taking. And I will confess that I was just like, ooh, if I take African art or Asian art, I will cover 3 core requirements. Right? Or 2, I can't remember which ones they were, but I was just like, this is the most efficient use of my time. Right. But it was just full, right? There was no room. I couldn't enroll in it. And so I was looking through the paper catalog, right? And I'd call in to register for a class. And I saw Asian American Identity by Ramsey Liam, a psychologist. And I was like, all right, fits my schedule. It covers this one requirement. Fine, right? And that was by far the most life-changing class. And it was just really, and I remember Professor Liam, in order to enroll in the class, you had to meet with him. Right. And I was just like, oh, fine, I'll go meet with this man. Right. And I had to sit in his office, and he was like, why do you want to take this class? Immediately, I started bawling. And I'm like, I've never met this man before, and I am crying. What is this voodoo? And he's just like, you're in. And I'm like, what is happening? And I'm like, now I'm scared. And it was and I will admit, so I was a business major in college in the 90s. I never read anything in college until that class. And I read everything in that class. I couldn't get enough. And I was just like, oh my God, what is this? Right. And it was just, and I'm glad he was a psychologist, right? Because he was just like, let's talk about this. Come to my office. And it was just like,
let's unpack this.
Let's unpack this. Where is this coming from? Right. And he was just astounding, right? It just rocked my world. And then I was just like angry, right? I was just like angry. Why did it have to take me until my 3rd year of college to learn any of this stuff? And so then I could have been a late 90s .com millionaire, but instead, here I am.
I appreciate you sharing that there's oftentimes this one professor or one teacher that really can redirect the direction over you. So it can redirect our path.
Everything, everywhere, all at once, the multiverse. And it's just like, I could have been living this different.
Yeah, and I feel like my version of that is, I grew up in Eagle Rock, which there's no shortage of Filipinos there, but I think for me, my equivalent moment was my first year of college. I went from Eagle Rock, which is very Filipino, Latino, to a school that was 50% white. And I was like, this place is so white. And so
All context.
it was all context, but it was a place where I felt like I didn't have a lot to contribute or a lot to say, a place where like folks would talk about summering in Europe. And I would be like, I've never been to Europe.
Still haven't been to Europe.
And I met a graduate student there by the name of Don Mabalan, also a UCLA alum, undergrad and master's as well in Asian American Studies. And I think it was her where for the first time in my life, even though I grew up around a lot of Filipinos, that I realized that Filipino stories, Filipino history, Filipino community issues, that counted as knowledge. And I just didn't know that prior to meeting her. So I appreciate that you also have one person that did this for you. One of the things that I have learned from OiYan talks about this person, Peter, that encouraged her to talk to folks who you may not agree with. Given that we're approaching something on Tuesday, and given that we're approaching Thanksgiving, holidays, these are always the moments where we're almost bracing ourselves because we know we're going to have to be in the same space with people who have diametrically opposed views from us when it comes to politics. And one thing I learned from you is that there is a pathway to having productive conversations. Could you just give folks a more in-depth look at how, like, what that experience was like to talk to people who have dedicated their lives to fighting against something you've dedicated your life to fighting for?
It was hard. And what I'll say is that of the 36 people, when I made the call out to be like, hey, are you a key member or leader of a Asian American identified organization? We also identified them, right, on the amicus briefs and petitions. And by we, I'm talking about my research team. So if any of my research team members, hey, thank you. We scoured these lists of organizations and we Googled them. We looked all over the place. It was very easy to find Asian Americans to interview with us that were supportive of affirmative action. We could have probably had like 50, 60, 70 or more. But we had to cut it off because we already had 18 when we only had 2 on the opposition. We could not find a lot of internet presence of a lot of these people until someone said to me, have you tried WeChat? And I was like, what the heck is WeChat? And this was 2016, right? It's like, I'd never heard of WeChat. Also, like, even though I identify as Chinese, and so for those of you who don't know, WeChat is a Chinese diasporic social media platform. But because my family's diaspora comes through Hong Kong, my family is very suspicious of anything that comes out of mainland China. And so I had never heard of WeChat. But then I started building some connections and relationships. So relationships matter, right, with folks in that space. And they were like, hey, here's somebody who's affiliated with that organization. And then they would help connect. Because what I also found was there's these essentially social justice warriors on WeChat as well. They keep getting censored on WeChat, unfortunately, but they have vast networks of people. And so they became my kind of relational trust brokers. And so that's how I found people to interview. And I think having research skills and an IRB in place, funnily enough, it really helped, because to have a protocol and like, here's what I need to ask you, and I'm going to stay on track here, and I'll ask some probing questions here and there, but I'm going to, when I get, like, you'll read in the book that one of the people says to me in the interview, he was like, I can tell you're Chinatown Chinese. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he's like, you probably have family members who work in garment factories, restaurant, low class, right? And I was just like, what does my protocol say? Like, he was trying to bait me in that moment. And I was just like, is this hard enough to find someone to talk to me for this study? Like, I cannot pop off right now, right? This is for the research, this is for the scholarship, for the knowledge, right? And so I was just like, yeah. And you also forgot the casino workers. right? Because all my aunts and uncles work in the casinos in Connecticut, and I'm very proud of every single one of them, right? And I also have a PhD. Would you like to continue with this interview? And what was wild was 10 minutes in, he and I were having a really great conversation. And the hardest part is just like the listening, right? Like, because I had a protocol, I wasn't trying to fight him, right? And at the end I said, do you have any questions for me, right? But I held off for more than an hour with this person. And as I was leaving, he was like, don't forget to vote for Hillary. This is 2016, right? And he was just like, he's very active in the California Democratic Party. And he was just like, make sure you tell all your friends and family to vote for Hillary. And I was just like, this is so wild. And right. And so I think something that I've learned from a journalist friend of mine is also researchers are curious, journalists are nosy. And I've been trying to figure out how to be more nosy, because I think I was still in this very like politely curious stance at the time. But now, 8 years later, I kind of wish I'd been way more nosy. Yeah. So, but it's that listening. And I know that you went and visited a Filipino Trump rally one time. I challenged you to do it. I was like, do it.
This is why I bring this up, because I was literally in this conundrum of going to family gatherings where, myself, my second generation cousins, for the most part, are like left leaning on a lot of things. My parents are left leaning, but their siblings are on the MAGA train. And so it was OiYan who sent me this flyer.
Oh, yeah.
For a Filipinos for Trump rally in 2020, I believe, right?
Yeah.
And it was
Diamond Bar? It was
no, Pomona? It wasn't. I live in Pomona, and the and the Filipinos for Trump rally was in West Covina, which is like, for folks that know, it's like a hop skip, it's a stone's throw away from Pomona. And it was scheduled to be at the Jollibee.
Delicious.
So she was like, you have no excuse. You must go.
It's right there, dude.
But,
I'm not telling you to go to like an actual MAGA. I mean, you're not going to Madison Square Garden. You're just going to.
Yeah. And, to your credit, I mean, this is where I think it's great to have friends that are pushing you beyond your comfort zone, because after arriving at the event, the convening, whatever you want to call it, and after signaling that I'm like, I'm only here for media. Like, I'm only here as a researcher, to make sure no one confused me for them. When I got to talking to folks, I realized, oh my gosh, there's actually a lot of overlap that we have in our biographies. And oftentimes it's like this one pivotal moment that caused them to move in a completely different direction. But otherwise, our biographies line up pretty closely, which we don't really, that's kind of a nuance we don't really get to see on, like, when we're living perpetually online on Twitter and Instagram, because we're so used to just like draw boundaries and draw lines. So
our ideological bubbles.
Yes. So I thank you for sending me to the Filipinos for Trump rally. But I do want to leave time for people in the audience to ask questions, because I'm sure you have a bunch of them. So let's open it up. Anyone want to chime in?
And Denise has got a mic, so she'll be our Phil Donahue Oprah.
So Corey, and we have questions. If we have questions on the Zoom, we have 2 questions on the Zoom.
Ooh, hey, Zoom land.
We're gonna go to the room first, because Corey's gonna read what's on the Zoom. Anybody in the room?
Also, what is the Dodger score now?
It is still tied. No.
5-6.
See, I was listening. I want the record to show. That's why I don't know it's 6-5. Are the Dodgers winning? No. Okay. Back to our more important program here. Oh, Carmen, you weren't trying to give me the score.
Thank you all for just sharing so much insight and backstory. One thing I wondered, because I haven't yet read the book, or your book, but I will. Did you find that because you had that awakening moment about storytelling versus research to break that mold, that maybe it was also a marketing decision, right? When you were talking about like admissions and the different paths, like a lot of it's marketing, right? So I don't know if that's addressed in your book or not, but is that because you have a business background too?
Yeah.
Right?
You mean marketing for the book or
Just
marketing?
marketing in terms
marketing
of
in general.
storytelling.
Oh,
Yeah.
storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can speak to this. I think my entree into storytelling started a couple years before we became a completely fact-resistant society in this era of
Fact
misinformation.
resistance. That's a good term.
Yeah,
I'm gonna use that.
Before, disinformation, misinformation was the norm. And it happened when actually I'm queer. And so it happened when I I came out and I had some family members that reacted not so great about me being queer. And my first instinct, because I was at UCLA, was to bombard them with empirical data that explains why queer people are just as great, if not better, than straight people.
Look at all the amazingness.
Yeah. And I realized that that did absolutely nothing to move the needle. And it wasn't until I exposed some of these relatives to stories that unfroze their perceptions of who gay people and queer people were that I started to see movement. And it was then that I was like, oh, shoot, stories have a lot more cachet and influence than statistics or studies, even though I was at UCLA living in a world where that was what matters most. And then the other thing I would say about storytelling is that, and this is one of the byproducts of having been a sociology grad student that writes about Filipino Americans. It's a topic that in sociology is not very valued for a variety of reasons. And so I learned that very quickly in grad school and realized how much I could use myself as a Trojan horse to get people to care about what I was writing about. And it just made me realize that you have to have different tools in your arsenal to get people to pay attention. Because I was very clear that like what I wrote about did not on its own merit attention from the people like professors and such. So I needed to be more creative about how to get them to care. And that took a lot of growing pains, but I'm very grateful for having like found a way to storytelling that early in my career, because it's really been, I think it's been like, I don't know, I feel like that's what folks like, that's what they brand me as, is that person that like can convert research to storytelling. So I like that.
Yeah, it's more fun. I would say to write this way. I feel like it's harder because it's deep self introspection too, which in like we don't do feelings. We don't do feelings in research, right? But to your question about marketing, like I guarantee you that this book I know has already reached way more people than any of my other dozens of research publications. It's really, I'm not gonna lie, it's really great to walk into a public library and be like, there it is. That's amazing. Or like see like, oh, it's checked out. And I have 2 other edited volume books. Like I guarantee you I will never see them in my local independent bookstore. I will never see them in the local public library. It's a different audience, right? And I think the storytelling, it reaches so many more people. And I've been wondering this a lot because I study higher education, is we need more of this. And unfortunately, the academy, you talked about the reward structure, it doesn't reward a lot of this storytelling at all. But then like you have these places that are so rich with knowledge and information that just won't get out. Right? And how might that then influence what we're seeing today? I've just been noodling on that a bit. So marketing, or just thinking about it as like getting it out.
Last thing that I wanted to say.
Yeah.
So I just had the opportunity to see.
Hold on. They can't hear you on the Zoom without the mic.
stop talking. But I just had the opportunity to see on Broadway. It just won a Tony, and I just saw it 2 days ago. But anyways, your storytelling, because of the way the book is structured, could be a great Broadway thing. No, think about it. I mean, really, like just the vision you cast for your daughter, asking you that question, that is a powerful visual, and it'd be powerful on stage. So
Thank you so much for that. I know.
You
Someone
tried
has
out
told me I need to.
East West Theater as well.
it was The Outsider.
Oh, that's someone told me
The
like
East West
players.
players.
Yeah.
We have a Bruin alum affiliated with theater that we could, yes.
Yeah. This is different. People have said
Here's
like
Sally. Here's
children's
Sally
books.
right here. Can I go to a question on the Zoom? Is that okay? Corey's got the question on the Zoom.
So the first question is about the format of the book. Did you ever consider writing with Tay instead of to her?
Actually, she argued for co-authorship.
Royalties.
I know. I think it was like the last pass with the publisher. And I think by then she was 8. And she said like, hey, shouldn't I get co-authorship? These are my words. And I said, okay, authorship means writing. Okay. So I could argue for this in this last moment if maybe you could write like a little quick epilogue, like a few words at the end, like what you think about this. Now, she was like, no, thanks. But so she was like, but I want to autograph books. And so if you ever see her and you have your book, she is more than happy to sign the books for you, or mail a mail. What is it? The book. There's stickers. A sticker that we can mail out for you. Book plate. That's the word. I'm still learning book industry things. But she has come up with she and I are noodling on a new book, and she wants full co-authorship on this next one.
We'll keep it under wraps.
We'll keep it under wraps, please. Thank you.
Watch out for Tay.
Another question from Zoom. There have been many occurrences of Asian American exclusion lately, such as not including the identity on demographic forms or not including Asian Americans in race discussions. Do you feel that Asian Americans are becoming more invisible now than before?
That's a big one. I mean, we've been in many decades policy struggles and advocacy struggles for disaggregated ethnic data, right? And I think when I was here at UCLA in 06, 07, that's when the UC system decided to start expanding the race and ethnic categories, right? There was a whole campaign that was led from students here at UCLA called Count Me In. And it successfully got the UC system to start collecting data on various groups of ethnic Asian American communities and Pacific Islander communities, but they also went further, right, and expanded the categories under all the racial big categories. So I think the challenge then, and we hadn't anticipated it as young people, is do people know how to use these data? And I think the answer has been no. At least not what I've seen, right? And people just don't know, and it remains true. I think there's still a general racial illiteracy of how to talk about race and ethnicity and disparities and struggles and wins, like pros and like strengths, not just like the ways that there are disparities, but also how there are strengths and assets and complexities and diversity. We don't fully talk about these things in nuanced ways. And so I think it's a continuing struggle, right? So people have had wins, but it's not just getting the disaggregated data, right? Because I was at UC San Diego a few years ago, and I was like, the first time after, oh wow, we have like a substantial amount of this disaggregated data now. What are you all doing with it? And they were like, what is it?
Yeah, can I address this question too? I think there's a lot of arenas where folks forget that Asian American experiences are experiencing certain forms of inequality as well. I was just talking to some public health folks that did research. They're from Drexel University, Gabriel Schwartz and Jackie John, and they were doing work on Asian Americans and police violence, victims of police violence, and there was no data, and so they had to literally scour newspapers to look up obituaries and create their own data set to show that police killings also occur within Asian American communities, particularly Pacific Islander communities as well. That said, I think it's oftentimes when you're erased, especially in this discourse, there's an inclination for people to try to prove this whole like we're oppressed too sort of thing. And I would caution folks from doing the we're oppressed too thing. And even if there is evidence of this, like I did this, I'm guilty of this myself, where I felt like I didn't see like queer folks represented in immigration literature. So I almost like went overboard with showing all the struggles that queer people face. And then I would like leave my writing space or leave school, and I would go with my friends and realize they're like laughing and talking shit and like cackling with each other and just having a good ass time. And I was like, wow, like social science and sociology is not equipped to capture the full humanity of Asian American lives, queer lives. And so for the place I had to look to was actually art, like theater, creative writing. And so I feel like it's there's a lot of components to trying to address or mitigate this erasure that doesn't just include social science, as we've learned, but also the arts and creativity as well.
You want to ask a question, Sally?
I just wanted to add to this part of the conversation, and that it was just announced today, as all of us are proud Bruins here, most of us, that UCLA has become an Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander serving institution that joins over 200 other institutions across the nation that share this designation, which means more funding for things like research, our academic institution that'll help us, and continue to support us to be number one. So yeah, so that was just something I wanted to share.
Hey.
Yes, thank you for raising that, Sally. It's called the Anapisi designation. It allows us to apply for federal grants, but also could be more support for students, different resources for students, for undergrad, graduate students. And we are looking to hire a director to support that work. And that person would work very closely with our director for as we seek the Hispanic Serving Institution designation as well. Thank you, Sally. Anyone else in the room have a question? Should go back to the Zoom. Can I do one more, OiYan and Anthony? So I'm going to paraphrase the question, but it hasn't been discussed as much, OiYan, that a large part of your work has been to provide writing for amicus briefs that would be a significant part of Supreme Court decisions and reviews, and that you have authored that, you've researched that, your team has contributed to that. Has anybody ever asked you if you could redesign admission processes to be more equitable and reflective of the city and state in which they reside? What would you advise?
So one of the people I interviewed who was pro affirmative action, actually, so this is in 2016 again, so 8 years ago. And when I asked her, what is your ideal system? She said, open admissions. If people want to learn, they should learn. And she was like, I take an abolitionist stance on higher education. And I was like, huh. And at the time I was like, that would never work. How do you even, like, I can't even imagine that, right? Like, and it just I couldn't wrap my head around it. But as time has gone on over these last 8 years, I've gotten to a point where I'm like, why not? Why, because you start, and I've been revisiting the history of the admission systems and practices to begin with. It is a very relatively young field. It's only a little bit over 100 years old. Now, higher education has been around since the 1600s in the United States. The admissions field started in 1910. All right, and in 1910, And, you know, like every profession always has like an association meeting, right? Their first professional association meeting in the field of admissions, the theme was the Jewish problem. Like, whoa, wow, right? And so I say all this because admissions offices were opened not to be like, who are the best and most deserving to come to school and who can benefit. It has always been about rejection. It has always been about shutting the door. And so as I've been revisiting these histories and archives of how admissions came to be the way it is today, including things like the SAT and the ACT, that's all based on eugenic science, right? Racist science, pseudoscience, because it's not really science, right? And so it's all been about shutting the door on people. And so I think about that conversation I had with that, you know, interviewee who, and I talk about her in the same chapter, in the same pages I talk about Don Nakanishi, right? And because both of them shared with me that they were among the first classes of students of color in the 60s that were allowed to go to their colleges, right? Don was part of the first integrated class at Yale, right? This person was part of the first integrated class at UC Davis. And the way this person talked about, I was like, how did you end up at UC Davis? And they said, well, some people at UC Davis came to Stockton. I was in community college at the time. And they said, like, do you want to come to Davis? And that was it, right? And I was like, that is kind of beautiful, right? Like, if there are people who want to learn, why do we stop them from doing it? And so I've started to really just imagine broadly, right? Like, and I've started, you know, we often talk about admissions as selective colleges and universities. The honest truth is they should be called rejective colleges and universities, right? And I get this from, I have another study where I interviewed 50 college admissions leaders across the country. And this one person, I said like, oh, so you're the dean of admissions at this college. And she said, and she laughed and she was like, I feel like that title is a lie. Because she said, most of my job is how to reject. And so my title should be the dean of rejection, right? Because her institution was rejecting 90%. And she said, like, these are all highly qualified, right? This myth out there of like, if you get rejected, you're not deserving, that you don't have merit, that you don't have talent is BS, right? Because when you look at it, these people who are getting rejected are academically talented, right? And so it's like when we live in a world where we should have more talent and more people contributing to all the problems that we have in this world, why do we shut the door, UCLA? Why do we shut the door?
Thank you. Thank you, OiYan. I think you wanted to make one last comment. Hold on.
Thank you so much. The whole conversation was very interesting, but one quick thing about the baby and the gender, I related to that because my husband and I are older parents and we knew we would have one child. So we did not want to find out the gender. But as my husband's white, so he, and I tell this because this social stuff comes up, as he learned and he commented, you know, so at the baby shower, you get the white, the colors, the white, the yellow, the purple, the greens and all that. And then he remarked like 6 months later, it's like, wow. And then the Indians, he was telling his sister, he goes, and then the Indians came to see the baby and we had more gifts. So he actually thought that was a good thing, not having the gender disclosure up front because you got twice as many gifts, just FYI. But the comment on the last, so our son now, that way we had a boy, he's 20. And this conversation, this last part is very interesting to me because he's at Harvard. So I saw the documentary, followed the affirmative action case. You might want to look up, just in the last few weeks, I heard Malcolm Gladwell, he just came out with another book. It's called Social Engineering. And he talks about Harvard, Princeton, and Yale and talks about rejecting. and then over the last 2 years, I've been reading all this stuff from Harvard also on this affirmative action stuff. But Malcolm Gladwell explains it this way. They're rejecting because in their own way, that's social engineering. And he puts together a comment and he says, he looked at all the colleges across the country and said, why is it that Harvard has the most number of sports clubs? And he said, you know, if you said to me that was Clemson, I'd say, yeah, you go to Clemson, you're going to be in sports. Why Harvard? And I posed that question to my husband that night, and he said, you know what? It's interesting because I Googled it. It's like, why? Well, the way he explains it is, you know, if you Google what happens at Harvard is they have an equestrian club, they have polo, they have lacrosse, they have all these clubs that they need to now admit students to, but these are upper class white sports and activities that you normally have access to because your family belongs to the country club. And so that's kind of what you're talking about, but that is a natural. So the director of admissions just says, well, I have to fill all these activities. So they're not, you know, it's their way of saying, we're not rejecting you. We just have to fill these other spots also. So you don't fit that because we're first generation and da, 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 da. So
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to always offer you all any opportunity of any way you'd like to encourage folks to keep learning, connecting, giving back. Is there anything last that either of you would like to uplift?
Palestine.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. We also really appreciate your time and want to reiterate that your books are here for sale and that you will hang out for do some signing. Yes, thank you both. We really appreciate you all. We're going to say bye to our folks on the Zoom.
Bye,
Thank
Zoom
you
world.
all.
Thank
And thank you all who are here. Please take food, take some extra with you to go. And we'll take a quick, can we take a quick photo up here before you head to sign? All right, awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. We will send you a quick survey in the next week or two because we'd love to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
I always forget, I gotta